I'm sorry, Sam. I'm just having a hard time putting this book down because, yeah, granted, I wrote it, but I would say
you're hanging on your own words. I know.
I'm hanging on my own words. Well, hello, everyone. This is Wilson Cole, and I'm president of Adams, Evans, and Ross and Backdoor Hiring Solution. I have with me today our in-house general counsel attorney for Adams, Evans, and Ross and compliance officer for Backdoor Hires. How are you doing, Samantha?
I'm doing great. Last day in the office before you and I hit the ground running, seeing everybody in person.
Yeah, that is true. It is at the time of this recording, we have trade show season, and so Sam and I are on the trip this week seeing clients. Next week we have a little bit of a reprieve, and then the following week she is taking East Coast and I am taking West Coast as we go out to meet with the clients and kind of hopefully win converts to better practices when it comes to staffing and recruiting, debt collection for staffing firms, and all of that good stuff. So what we're going to cover today is, and actually the next few episodes of the Monday morning meeting are going to be on the top excuses. Let me kind of give a precursor here for a half a second. With clients that are in the staffing side of our business, we deal with about 3,000 staffing and recruiting firms globally. Half of them are going to be staffing firms, half of them are going to be recruiting. We're going to talk backdoor hires, direct hires, but staffing firms have the same exact problem with conversions or where they convert your temporary or your temporary goes out there and they just hire them. The staffing industry has the same problem. You guys call it something different. For the sake of argument, we're going to call it backdoor hires. But over on the staffing side, it's going to be over on it's going to be returned to as either temp napping or conversion or whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mention the two of the most popular excuses that we hear when somebody is backdoor hired. Sam's going to kind of give you the legal argument, and we will go from there. The first one is we already knew the candidate. Oh my God, you send us somebody that we already knew. I knew Joe 20 years ago and we worked together, whatever. Now, the fact that I haven't spoken to Joe since the last trade show where he was my competitor across has absolutely nothing to do with it. Somehow or another, Sam, since I knew good old Joe, I don't feel like I owe my client $30,000 in the fee. What's the legal argument for collections and also the legal argument if this thing goes to suit?
Well, I think, I always end up pissing off a handful a year of opposing counsels who, well, my client already knew the candidate. And I go, well, your client probably knows a lot of people. You and I now professionally know each other, and I have no idea if you're happy at your job or if you're ready to jump ship. That usually kind of reframes it where they can't go, well, they knew them. And it's like, okay, well, you can know a lot of people. Knowing who they are and what they do and knowing that they're wanting to make a transition are two very different things. And I think also, I look at it very differently when we are going back and forth in collections or if it's getting ready to go to suit. When did they say we already knew the candidate? Because did they say it, you sent over the resume and we've already got them in the application process? Or did you send the resume, they set up all the interviews, and then when, Joe Smith, your candidate's there, and they're giving him the tour of the office, he runs into a fraternity brother that he hasn't seen since 1988, and now all of a sudden when the invoice comes in, they're like, actually, turns out, our so-and-so has known him. Well, doesn't matter. This is just how they walked it. They see it as they found $30,000 when they went to introduce Joe to the guy he's known since 1988.
Yeah, unless that interview had something to do with a keg stand, they probably still don't have anything in common. So,
yes.
So yeah. Well,
so I treat it very differently in how I approach the collections with how and when it's represented that they already knew the candidate.
Okay. Yeah, because there is a difference, or what we do is there's a difference. If he's been interviewing in the last 30 days, then that's going to be much different. But I can tell you, in doing this 28 years now, I've only had one time out of thousands and thousands and thousands of these types of collections where they were actually already interviewing. So knowing someone and knowing that they're looking for a job are two different things. And I'll even go a step further. If it is a competitor, most competitors in niche industries kind of have this detente to where it's an unspoken rule of, I'm not going to rape and pillage your staff. You don't rape and pillage my staff, because if you see,
Tiffany came to work with you today.
Oh, Tiffany did come to work. Come on up. I am working remotely, as I often do, and I have one of my fine brown dogs with me. I don't have Bo, my Great Dane, but there's my fine brown dog. Loves to.
Sorry, I got slightly distracted, and new people would be wondering if you knew that there was a dog lurking.
Yes. She occasionally, probably about half the time, if I'm working remotely like I do, especially on Mondays, she hangs out with me. So, but typically they have detente to where they don't go and rape and pillage and pull all their staff, because the last thing you want is not necessarily a trade war, but where you're reaching out and stealing everybody's staff. A recruiter gives you a level of deniability on, you didn't have anything to do it. You just hired a recruiter, and therefore, the recruiter went out. And I've had recruiters where literally there are emails that say, okay, here are the companies that I want you to target, that their client tells them, but don't let them know that it's us until you find somebody that's ready to make that jump to let them know that it's us, because we don't want to make this competitor where they're doing the same thing. And literally, when the client brought back the perfect candidate and they go, Steve Smith, he's been their VP of sales for the last 20 years. They go, oh my God, Steve Smith, I've known him for years. Why, we already know it. Okay, well, you just told me to go after. You didn't feel like picking up the phone and trying to steal Steve Smith. And so sometimes you even run into a little bit of that. So there's a very close cousin to, we already knew the candidate. And this one gets you maybe a layer into it. But in my opinion, it's not as personal. And that excuse, and by the way, if anybody wants our free book, if you go to our website, I'll send you the book for free. Just cover my cost of shipping. It covers 9 of the top excuses. But this one is, we already had their resume. Dear God, Sam, your client sends over somebody. I've already got his resume. I already know that he graduated from, University of Nevada. I already know all of that good stuff. Now, granted, I got it 4 months ago or 5 years ago. I had no idea it was in my database. What's the legal argument on that?
Well, I think it again comes back to, were you doing anything with it? Had you gotten the resume? Had you encountered, one of my favorite things when I'm dealing with opposing counsel is, well, they already have the resume. Here's the email that shows they received it, 6 months before your client sent it. I'm like, that's great. Where's the resume, or where's the email where they confirmed it to the candidate that the resume was received? Okay. Here's the email where they emailed back and forth with the candidate. Where's the email to my client saying, hey, thanks for sending this resume over, but it turns out we got it last week. HR manager 1 was handling it. HR 2 manager was talking with you. So sorry for the confusion, but we already had it. And that's sent within, a day or two.
Okay.
That I treat differently than, especially in situations where you walk the candidate all the way through the interview process. And then you get to the end and you're sending the invoice and they're like, you know what, actually we were going and doing some spring cleaning and John found it under his desk.
Or they go back through and do a search in their database, and then HR is trying to cover their ass because HR sucks, and that's why, you know, they had to go out and find outside talent. They had this guy the whole time, but they didn't move forward. You're absolutely right. It's that, you know, if they were talking to him a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, that's one thing. Having, you know, in the old days, and I'm giving away, I don't know if you remember phone books. You may remember old phone books that as a kid, we'd set you up on in the dining room table. But phone books
that was really my only use for them, is they were a cheap booster seat.
They were a cheap booster seat. But the phone books back in the olden day were, I mean, they were my generation's Google, which is sad to say. But one thing that we used to say when they said, well, we already knew the candidate. Well, you already knew the candidate, or, you know, you had the candidate's number. We had the resume. Well, you had his number in the phone book that's sitting on your desk, but knowing that he was looking for a job, or knowing how to find that candidate in that vast volume of information, especially if it's a niche industry. So just keep that in mind.
Well, and I think one of my favorite kind of excuses, it was a variation of, we already knew him, we already had the resume, is I'm going, okay, show me that you were actively doing something. Yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, my favorites, well, we were going to meet for drinks. Okay. Well, were you doing that as part of just networking? Because there's a difference between networking in your industry and actively interviewing a candidate as well.
I agree.
And I think that's a distinction. And this kind of comes back to one of our first episodes of Monday Morning Meeting of, you need to shut up with our clients of when they start trying to create all of these loopholes of, well, we were having drinks after the such and such conference. And, you know, I mentioned that we had an opening, but they didn't apply. If they're going to start talking like that, let them talk.
And just,
but you shut up.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because when I hang up this, before our staff meeting earlier this morning, I talked to a client for about 10 minutes. We didn't get finished with the conversation because I had to let him go because I had a staff meeting. I'm going to call him back. He and I talked a few weeks ago. And here is the scenario that we don't have in collections yet. I've told him, you need to shut up, but I also realize he's wanting to, and I understand the logic of he's wanting to try to salvage the client. But it's a scenario where he had the checks. They said, we're not sure the client's going to, or the candidate's going to work out. If we wind up hiring the candidate or keeping the candidate, process the checks. If not, then we're going to want you to replace him. He agreed to it. The problem with that is now like I told him, you should have processed the check, and then told him that, you've got a 90-day guarantee, you've got a 6-month guarantee, you got a 12-month guarantee. We'll replace the candidate. But he has weakened his position so much more because they said, we're not going to pay you. Well, now they've hired the replacement from another recruiter. So he had something that was so clear. I placed a candidate. They even sent me the check. And then now the fact that he held on it, and the understanding was, you're going to help us find it and we'll pay you when the second one goes in. Well, now somebody else has placed that candidate. I would assume, we can still argue it, but he's in a much weaker position.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Because I'm looking at it, and granted, I'm doing this, with what you've just given me, not seeing contracts and, all my favorite documents that me and my 800 colors of highlighters will touch. But, and I know you judge my quadrants and highlighters, but I would wonder if the contract is for a guarantee, if they've already paid for service, and granted the check wasn't cash, but they sent it, you can argue that they paid for it and that they weren't they went around the contract by going to another recruiter to hire the replacement without giving him a shot at the replacement.
Well, they may have actually given him a shot, but just, you know, his candidate is the second choice, or the replacement candidate is the second choice. But,
and, you know, it also gets into the, you know, I always, and I hate to say it, but roll my eyes when I see a contract that has a prorated instead of a guarantee replacement.
Yep.
Where you'll pay your client back if the candidate doesn't work out.
Yeah, money back refunds are horrible things to put in the contract. But the quick thing, and which I know that in the past, if you want to learn about that, I know Samantha and I did a whole episode on that back a few months ago. But on the two of, we already knew the candidate and we already had their resume. The rule of thumb is you can make a point of, no, here's where I presented them or whatever, but I come back to the litmus test that I utilize is when someone tells you they're not going to pay you because, as soon as it's very clear they're not going to pay you because, at that point, you know, hush, you know, just be totally silent. And whether you utilize us, you utilize your local attorney, or even another agency, you need to hush and go ahead and elevate on them. Sam, closing words on those two cousins of popular excuses for not paying on backdoor hires.
I think it also, this is gonna sound slightly counterintuitive, but when you're presenting the candidate or presenting the job to the candidate, if you're talking to them before you submit the resume, and the candidate says, oh yeah, I know so-and-so there, or, you know, I submitted a resume 8 months ago and never heard from them. Before I would send that resume, I'd send over to whoever you're dealing with, hey, I've got a great candidate for you. You know, give no detail, but I've got a great candidate for you that I want to send over, but you may already know of them. Can I get confirmation that this will be my candidate?
Well, and that's good, but I would also go a step further. I would either get an email back and say, I would send an email to that candidate and say, hey, Steve, this is just recap our conversation. I know that you know Steve over there, but like you said, you haven't talked to him in eight months when you sent a resume over. But at this point, as far as you know, the job is kind of dead. And I would get a commitment from that candidate, because now what's going to happen is, now that that candidate knows, even before you send that email, he may be texting with, you know, Steve saying, hey, I understand y'all have an opening, let me come back over or whatever. The client is still the procuring cause.
Yeah.
And so the key backdrop to that is get a signed contract that covers those contingencies. And another topic for another conversation, but some of the things that I've seen is, unless they are in the active process of interviewing, this is our candidate, you know, and it's active process of interviewing in the last 60 days, 30 days, or whatever. Yeah. You know, and you may argue that gives them an out, but at least it narrows it down. And if they have interviewed in the last 30 days, then chances are it's probably not your candidate anyway.
Exactly.
Well, we will wrap up this issue of Monday Morning Meeting, and join us as Sam and I are out. Come by, see us at our booth. I know Sam's going to be speaking at First Interview to their 200+ members here in a few weeks. Make sure you see her riveting display on some of these subjects that we're going to be talking to. She's going to be covering some really, really good stuff. And it's a neat way for her to share her insight. And she's not even going to charge you the customary $350 to $500 an hour that her brethren in the legal profession do to share her knowledge with you. So email us if you need us. And next issue, for the next 3 or 4 issues, we're going to take the top excuses of backdoor hires and temp conversions. Also, Samantha and I are doing a webinar where we're going to break the numbers out for backdoor hires, where we're going to talk a little bit about the main excuses, but more than anything else, we're going to let you know in that webinar what the main industries are and what the number one positions are after running millions and millions of records in searching. So we've got some really interesting data on it. But anyway, everybody, until next week, have a good week. Bye, Sam.
Bye.